Welcome everyone. In today's video I wanted to do a comparison between the Lumintop D2 and the Sofirn IF22A. I haven't seen a lot of content out there that directly compares these, and I suppose it makes sense. They're not exactly the same size or price flashlight, although they're pretty close. I think Lumintop is $29 and Sofirn is $43 or something like that on Amazon, but I feel like as jacket pocket thrower lights, they're in sort of the same class and it warrants a comparison, and hey, I got them at the same time anyway, so might as well. Now there's a lot to cover in this video, and so as to not make it overly long, I'm not going to waste a lot of time going over the exact features each of these lights have. You can read that in the description of this video, other than to just make a couple quick points that I like, which is they're both 21700 battery lights. They both have a flip-up thing here where you can use USB-C to charge them. That is nice because I can't tell you how many devices I've gotten over the years that are still using, say, outdated micro USB, and you're thinking, yeah, I'm sure I got one of those cables somewhere in a closet, but it's a shame to have to pull out that cable just for this device when literally nothing else uses it anymore. In this case, to be able to use the same cable that charges the laptop, charges my tablets, you know, those types of things, really handy. Always have one of those around. The Lumintop D2 only comes with an 18650 battery, which does a decent enough job. I'm assuming they didn't give you a 21700 in order to save money. They do give you a sleeve that you can put over this to stop it from rattling around in the case, although I did go ahead after getting it and order my own 21700 battery to put in it. I've read some good things about Keep Power as a battery brand. Some companies like to exaggerate their capacity ratings, but if we're to take Keep Power's word here that it's 5,000 milliamp hours, that places it almost twice the capacity of the battery that comes with the Lumintop D2, and that can definitely make a difference with the higher modes in action. And last thing I'll say, just because it's important to everything else we're going to say in the review, is a lot of people that talk about the Lumintop D2 are using the stock LED that comes with it. It also is available in a Nichia lens, which has a much warmer 4000 Kelvin beam, and just for the sake of your understanding, that is the version I'm using, the Nichia lens, for this. So I want to go into some general impressions of both of these lights, and then we'll take them outside and look at how they do in some outdoor settings at night to really gauge the throwiness of these lights. Using both of these was cool for me because I had mostly used lights like, say, the M2R Warrior 5.0 light, which is sort of a balanced light, does a good job of throwing off some spill and has some really good distance. It's probably one of the further throw lights that I have that I use frequently. A lot of the other lights are small pocket lights. One that I carry frequently is the Lumintop Tool AA. I just find that I've done a review video about this light also. I find it to be a great all-around pocket light, but of course not something you would use when you want to throw for several hundred meters. So stepping into these was a very different experience for me. I would say generally they're very cool, but one thing that I would say about both of these being kind of a dedicated thrower is until you get into some of the more medium and high output modes, there's not always a ton of spill light coming off the beam, which is to be expected. But as far as using a flashlight for taking a walk or something like that, they're not always as useful as I thought they would be. So especially the Sofirn, it throws such a concentrated beam over such a distance that I feel like it makes a wonderful spotlight if you're a security officer or something like that where you need to be able to see clear to the other side of a parking lot and to pick up details of a person or an object. But if you're out walking your dog or maybe you're camping, I don't know that that light output is necessarily ideal for that, just because on short ranges when you're shining on the ground, pretty much most of what you're seeing is this very small hot spot that's not illuminating a very big area that's that useful. So for those kind of settings, you would probably be better off with a light like this that has a pretty shallow bezel and just throws off a pretty diffuse amount of light over a wider area. Your mileage may vary. That's just my opinion. Of the two, the Lumintop puts off, I would say, more of a useful spill, probably because it does not feature this IF lens on the inside, which really focuses that beam a lot. This is just relying on the wide aluminum bezel on the outside, which still does a pretty good job of throwing. I wouldn't say it throws as far, which we'll see when I take it outside. But I would say that the Lumintop is the more balanced of the two. So in my opinion, if you were looking for one of these to carry with you regularly, and you wanted a little bit more versatility, I think the Lumintop D2 combines still being able to throw pretty well with also producing more usable light around the hotspot. And like I said, I like Nichia LEDs myself. I know not everybody does. I just like the warmer beam. It's a surprise to me. For many years, I used cool white LEDs and always just thought that was the norm until I used a Nichia, and it was like, wow, I really like the look of this. In fact, the Tool AA that I carry with me all the time is also a Nichia lens. It was my first experience with a Nichia lens, and I found that I was reaching for this flashlight fairly frequently, even to use where I might have picked a more powerful light just because I liked the beam color so much. It looks at night a little bit more like natural daylight hitting objects in terms of your eye's ability to pick up colors from it. At least that's what I find. Some other people say that as well. And when you look at a more cool white beam like the Sofirn has, it looks a little bit more like moonlight. Still does a good job, but you can wash out the detail and the color of things going into the really high modes on a cool white LED, I find. And then it's almost not useful because it's so much light and it's so white that you're not making out a whole lot of detail. Anyway, your mileage may vary. That's just been my thought. And certainly as I compare these two lights, those were two things that stood out for me, even more than the throw differences and things like that. I didn't want to get into features a whole lot, like I said, but I will mention this UI thing just because as far as comparing these two lights to each other, this is a pretty significant thing to note. The most lights that I use feature pretty standard setup of switching modes, which is to say, click the on switch to turn it on, and then you click and hold it to cycle through different modes, and then you click it once to turn it off. You can double click it to go straight into turbo mode for its maximum brightness, and then clicking to change the mode from there will step it back down. The Lumintop D2 is a little bit different in that regard, in that you do push the button once to turn it on, but you actually only single click the button to switch between the modes, and in order to turn it off, you have to click and hold it. I'm sure if you carried this light a lot of the time, pretty regularly, you would get used to that and it would be a non-issue. But if, like me, you're switching between different lights frequently, then it can get a little confusing because on most of my other lights, clicking and holding is how I switch modes. And so quite often, I click and hold it to switch modes and then it's actually turning the light off, or I'm going at the end, I want to turn it off, and I single click it, and that just steps it up into a super bright mode that it's not convenient anymore to be in, and then you're quickly trying to step it back down and turn it off. So it's a little jarring jumping between lights. I don't really like that about the Lumintop D2, even though I like a lot of other things about the light. It's a minor nitpick, but I feel like it's worth saying, especially if you're a person who is directly comparing these lights and thinking about getting one of them. If that's a turnoff for you, that's good to know going into it. Don't waste your time buying it just to get frustrated by that. One other minor little nitpick about the Sofirn is there's a little wiggle in the button here. I can move it a little bit with my thumb. It doesn't rattle when you move the flashlight, but there's a little play in it, and I don't know, in a perfect world, to me, there would be no play in the button. That's just a fit and finish thing. But on the other hand, you're getting a light that, in my opinion, can compete with a lot of flashlights that are roughly twice the price. And so to get this much flashlight for $40-something, little things like that you could easily overlook. I would have a bigger problem with it if I was noticing that on a $100+ flashlight. So for now, let's go outside and give you a look at what these things can do for throwing. Okay, I'm outside on a parkway. I thought this would be a good area to get some footage because there's a couple good things for us to look at. So you'll be able to tell more detail in a second when I turn these on. I'm standing on a hill, and it kind of goes downhill right in front of me and goes into a huge field that's at least several hundred yards until that expressway that you're seeing in the distance. And then if I pivot to my right, again, you'll see in a second when I light this up, there are some big boulders, probably about 50 or so feet from me, and then a bridge overpass, probably 100 yards or so from me. Behind that. So it'll give us some different things to see how well these lights light that up. So I'm going to start with the Lumintop D2. Okay. This is shining it on low mode a little ways in front of me, and then you can see as it starts to go down the hill, kind of tapers off. And if I shine to my right, it just barely starts to illuminate those boulders that I was talking about, but not very well. Alright. This is medium mode, so you see that it goes down the hill a pretty good ways, and I don't know how well the camera is picking it up, but for me, I can see light probably a good 100 yards or so down into that field. It doesn't quite make it to the expressway over there. And then if we turn to the right, now you can see that we're really starting to illuminate those boulders that I was talking about, but it doesn't quite make it to that overpass down the way there. Now, I don't know how well it's picking up in this lens until I look at it on a bigger screen, but often I find it looks like it's a little bit less bright on the camera than in real life. In real life, those boulders are pretty clearly illuminated for me. Alright, let me go back over here. I'm going to kick it up into high mode. This is about 500 or so lumens. So, pretty wide spill at this level, and it will go still roughly the same distance, right about until the divot right before the expressway starts, way down there. But doesn't quite make it to the dark spot right before the road over there. And now if we turn, those rocks are very clearly illuminated. You can make out a lot of detail with this Nichia lens. It looks very daylighty to me. And in real life anyway, I can now illuminate the side railing of that overpass up there in the distance, and a little bit of the pedestals underneath it. Now I'm going to, while I'm still looking this way, go into turbo mode. Alright, so now we see, I don't know that you can tell a huge difference on the detail of the rocks. The spill is extremely bright now, but if we look up to that overpass, I can pretty clearly shine light across the railing of that and see it well. And then if I shine down here, the spill is decent. It's not, the same as more floody flashlights, but there's a pretty usable amount of light through most of my field of vision down the field. And the hot spot just barely makes it into that black divot right before the expressway. If it were any brighter, I'd probably be shining it right into those cars down there. But if I come a little closer, you get a nice, bright kind of searchlight pattern. That's probably 50 yards away, and that's probably like 100 way down there. A couple hundred. Okay. Now we're going to try out the Sofirn. Let me get my mode correct first. Okay, starting as we did before, I'm going to shine the light right in front of the camera and then start going down that hill in front of me. That's about to the flat spot at the bottom of the hill. I can make it out in real life fairly well, and it makes it to about almost the middle of this huge field in front of me before the light really tapers off and you don't get much out of it on the low mode, which is pretty impressive. It definitely throws further than the Lumintop does. Even on the low mode with this, I can make out some detail of those rocks. It's not amazing, but it does illuminate them in a way that I don't think the D2 is doing. Let me step it up a mode. Okay, this is the medium mode. That's a pretty clear illumination on those rocks. It's a much cooler color temperature, as you can see, but in the medium, we're getting about the level of illumination that we were getting on the high before on those rocks, and it just barely does hit the railing of that overpass way over there, which is cool. Now, if we come back this way, now we can very easily hit the middle of this field, but it does seem to diffuse out quite a bit by the time we're getting anywhere near those cars over there. But as a searchlight for this field, pretty good illumination. I can pretty clearly, until it gets way out there, make out what I'm looking at throughout the field, which is great. That's a pretty good distance, and I think this throws more impressively than any of the other lights that I have. Okay, let's step it up. All right, now we're in high mode. We're starting to get some usable amount of spill light, but like I was telling you earlier, even on high mode, the spill on this is not as good as the Lumintop, but the throw will make it all the way to that dark area. You can see kind of to the railing just before where the cars are, just barely. That is not something that the Lumintop could do. That's very cool. I believe the high mode on this Sofirn is about 1,000 lumens. Now if we go back over to these rocks, excellent illumination. There's really nothing hiding over there now, and if we shine it up onto that overpass, I can very clearly hit the side railing of it as I go and illuminate all of those pillars underneath it and all of the trees that are underneath it. So if I were going to walk through there and wasn't sure if it was safe, definitely, and if I got a little closer, nothing would hide from me over there. Excellent detail on that. All right, we're going to come back this way and throw on turbo mode. All right, this is just over 2,000 lumens. Amazing how bright that hot spot is now. It's very, very intense, and there's a decent amount of spill. It takes up most of my field of view in front of me. It's just not very bright, not like the Lumintop was. But you can see a lot over in this tree line there and through there. That's a pond. And it does make it all the way to the cars. I'm not going to do that for too long because I don't want to bother people while they're driving. But definitely, if I were in a search situation or for whatever reason, whether it's security or rescue or whatever, that I really needed to scope out this whole field, on turbo mode here, I could illuminate anything that I want to in this field. And of course, those rocks are extremely bright now, and we can get, just as we did on high mode, anything we want over in here. Okay, one last thing I wanted to show you guys, just because earlier in this video I mentioned the Olight M2R Warrior that I've carried a lot, and prior to getting these two flashlights, it was one of the brighter ones, throwier ones that I had. I figured I would just show you that quick. Now again, this is not, really a thrower flashlight, but just for the sake of comparison. So yes, it gets to about the bottom of this hill, but it doesn't really do any more than that on low. I can just barely start making out those rocks in front of me, but not very well. But there's a hell of a lot more flood illumination on this light, obviously. It's a little bit more balanced. So that's the medium. You can start making out the rocks, but that's about as much usable distance as you get on medium. It makes it to the bottom of the hill. But it doesn't do a whole lot else than that. And then if I go into turbo, I can get to about the middle of the field. Peripherally, most of the things in front of me are pretty well illuminated, but it definitely doesn't have the distance of either of these other two lights. Okay, so closing thoughts on both of these flashlights. One minor nitpick I would say about the D2 Lumintop that I noticed early on is that the lanyard that they give you, I could not get through here. The lanyard that's currently on it is actually the lanyard that came with the Sofirn. This is a thinner cable here that goes through it. The one that I had, I just could not get through the hole. It doesn't seem sized very well for the hole that they gave you. I used pliers. I tried a few other things, just couldn't do it. Maybe somebody has a tip, for how to do it, but personally I'm of the contention you shouldn't have to pull out crazy tools and do some tricks just to get a lanyard on a flashlight. So that is a small design flaw as far as I'm concerned. Lanyard isn't make or break on a flashlight, but that's just worth knowing. In general, I think you could summarize both of these flashlights to say the Sofirn is definitely the better thrower. It just shoots farther. It shoots a more intense hotspot. We saw that outside. It was the only one of the two that could clear across that field. And it had much better distance on its low mode than the other one did. I could just see things like the boulders and the bridge that were just not possible with this. However, I think that comes at the expense of, in order to be the better thrower, it is so hyper specialized on that hot spot that it doesn't put out a whole lot of meaningful spill light around it until you're in the very high modes. That for general usage, I don't think that the Sofirn would be as great of a pick. So I guess I would condense that to say, if I had a smaller flashlight that was, say, a pocket light or something else on me that was much more floody for short range usage, I would definitely pick the Sofirn as my secondary light for when I need the distance, just because it clearly excels at that better than most other flashlights in this price range that I have ever used. If I only had one flashlight to carry with me for the day's outing, I would be more inclined to pick the Lumintop D2 instead, only because I think it has a better balance of, it doesn't throw quite as far, but it has a much more usable spill around it. And if I were doing things like going for walks or something like that, I think this would give me a much more usable light at shorter ranges, and strikes that balance a little better. And of course, in my case, I really like the color tone of Nichia, and that's what this particular Lumintop has. I can't really explain why. I just really am drawn to the body shape of this Sofirn. I like the way that the bezel flares out a little more than that, more than on the Lumintop. So, I mean, aesthetics matter to a degree. They may or may not to you. Something to bear in mind. Those are my thoughts. I hope this review was helpful for you guys if you've been deciding between a small thrower flashlight, and if you've been looking at or hearing about these two in particular. If I can answer your questions in the comments, I will. Otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video.